Good evening. This is Tuesday, March 7th, 2023 at 4 p.m. This meeting will be conducted in person in City Council chambers and via remote video and teleconference pursuant to 1 MRS Section 403-A. Members of the public may join the meeting by phone by dialing 1-929-205-6099 using meeting ID 889-8721-2598 and the password 778600 or via computer at the link provided. Members of the public may also submit comments by using the form on the city's website under government/city council/contact city council. This is a budget workshop session of the City Council and not a business meeting of the City Council. The meeting is open to the public, but is not a public hearing. The chairperson shall conduct the work session with the committee members and may elect to call upon the public in attendance for either questions or to obtain input and information. All work products will be developed by consensus and forward as advisory to the City Council for the matter warranting legislative action by the City Council at a business meeting so posted and assembled. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm going to do the roll call. Deputy Mayor Herlihy.
Present.
Councilor Stackpole.
Present.
Council Hanselman.
Present.
And Council Martell is online.
Present.
Excellent. Councilor Trench-Montagne.
Present.
And you get a tardy and you get sent to the principal's office next, okay? And I'm Mayor Brink. Welcome. We also have present at this time City Manager Steve Buck and Executive Assistant Larissa Ricketts. And this is my very first budget hearing this way, so please bear with me if I skip something or miss something. We'll get to it eventually because Larissa will make sure I don't miss anything. We don't have any adjustments as far as I know to the agenda. We don't have minutes because we haven't had one before. Did anyone sign the public participation sheet down there? No, thank you. We have no old business as this is new. And so under new business 23101-01, we're going to have a presentation by the city manager, Steve Buck. And then just to let you know, any questions are going to be asked. This is just an overview of the two budgets. And so quick questions will be allowed or clarifying questions because we'll be getting more into the budget later on. Steve, thank you.
Thank you. Going to bring the PowerPoint up, Ben? Thank you. So this is an overview of the fiscal year 23-24 municipal budget as currently recommended to the City Council for your first review. Starting out, we won't go into all of the details because all of this is covered later in the presentation, but this is the municipal calculation sheet. We've held everything for the municipal presentation in here. We've stagnated most of the elements other than the municipal budget so we can look at the singular impact of the municipal budget upon the mill rate and taxation calculation. Valuation is held constant, for example, but we do know that we have at least $20 million of new valuation that's been entered year to date with more forthcoming. County tax will be held stagnant as well. We have summarized the capital and debt service later in the presentation. Next slide is the revenue projections. Again, we're holding that constant other than changes on the municipal for this review tonight. as well as the use of undesignated fund balance, you'll see has changed from $850,000 to $150,000 as currently recommended. We've held all of the other factors consistent, the homestead, Betty, overlay, and tax increment financing. Those numbers will change subject to legislative actions that are still pending. Although I do note, as far as the municipal sides of the budget, the governor's budget as has been presented, I see no negative impacts as far as revenue sharing, Betty, homestead, or other elements in here. Going to the next slide, this is a summary of the municipal budget impacts for this year. You will note that the municipal services are calculated at $31.5 million this year. That's an increase of $2.3 million, or 8.05%. Libraries stayed the same at $561,975. Outside agencies at $95,680. You see a decrease of $604 there. That's because the Chamber of Commerce dues that represents has been moved to council dues as opposed to outside agencies. Debt service, you see, is an increase of $45,406. That is due to the second phase of the Presidential Lane extension. That is the first year's debt service on that $250,000 bond. Under the capital reserve, you see the municipal call-out is for $5,070,000. It's an increase of $806,039, or 18.9%. There's two major impacting factors in there. There's a $500,000 ramp-up for the CIP for the roadways, and there's $400,000 allocated for Memorial Gym to perfect roof repairs and other necessary improvements. So when you account for that $900,000 increase on those two line items alone, the remaining call-out is less than prior year. Looking at the revenue, you see revenue sharing. We currently have that booked at just over $5 million. That's a $301,000 increase, or 6.4%. I do anticipate before you get through this budget process that the State Taxation Committee will have reprojected that here by mid-March, and we should be able to bring you a positive outcome as far as improved revenues. The projection I'm using currently was the reprojection of the current fiscal year that we're in. They reprojected that back in December. I picked that up in my calculation, but I haven't projected beyond that. Other municipal, so total municipal revenues coming in at $13.3 million, an increase of $1,320,000, or 11%. We're also requesting to utilize an additional $150,000 of undesignated fund balance to go from $850,000 to $1 million this year. The council had discussed that earlier on in the process. We find that to be very sustainable based upon the current audits that we have had. So the increase to net taxation is a call out of $1,428,000, or 7.8% as our starting point. This next slide just breaks down a little bit further. The operational expenses are up by just under $2.4 million. Revenues are up by over $1.7 million. Net of operations is up by $622,000, or 3.4%. Again, the capital program is up by 4.4, or $806,000. That comprises your $1.4 million increase year to date. Going through the calculation sheet as we know it, valuation, again, we're going to hold that consistent at this time. It's too early to communicate with our assessor because April 1st is your assessment deadline. We do know that he's entered $20 million of new valuation year to date, and we anticipate that to easily hit $25 million before that closes out. Talking about the market adjustments, we anticipate those to be significantly less than the last 2 years, which have been significant for the single-family residential and last year for the commercial and industrial. Even though we will see some adjustments in the market, and we saw our latest state numbers at 87%, so they'll seek to bring our total valuation up to 91% so that we get 100% of the benefit of all tax abatement programs that are out there. Also, the county tax on this slide, we're currently projecting it the same as last year. We typically see a very minor increase for our municipality for two reasons. The lion's share of the value in York County is comprised of the coastal communities. Their valuations ramp much more rapidly than does Sanford's, so our proportional share of the county tax tends to be under what the percentage increase is for the year, plus we have a very aggressive tax increment financing program that hides much of our new valuation from the eyes of the state, which shields it from the county taxation. This next slide is a summary slide. So we're calling for $31.5 million this year on the expense side and operations, an increase of $2.3 million or 7.8%. These are the major categories that I'll break out in the subsequent slides that will show you the details as to where the overall majority of the increases are year over year. The categories that I'm calling out here, except for the and all other, which is $144,000, you can easily isolate where those increases are for each of these major categories. So looking at each of those categories independently, employee benefits and insurances, $7.4 million is an increase of $114,940, and I'll give you the details on the next page. Overtime salaries are up by $1.3 million. It's probably best if I just skip to the subsequent slide because I have all of the details on that. So again, employee benefits and insurances are up by $7.4 million or $114,990. It's an increase of 1.6%. That's comprised of our group life is up by $1,188. Unemployment, you see, decreased by $15,814. We are fully funded this year. We will make no contribution to unemployment because we've not laid anybody off. We have the opposite. We can't get enough people hired. So there's been no layoffs that have impacted our incomes and or displacements that have impacted our unemployment. Income protection, Maine Municipal Employee Health Trust, increased that by 4.9%. The $31,000 impact is that represented. Workers' compensation, our experience mod has gone from 2.23 down to 2.4, so that positive reduction produced net savings of $24,745. Social Securities and the changes associated with increased wages, type and number in our workforce accounts for $65,000 or 7.6% increase. And our health insurance, we've kept our plan design the same, the POS 200 with our HRA set at 70% max out of pocket. By sharing in that high deductible plan, we're able to put $300,000 from our HRA savings from prior years savings in that program to produce a net increase of just $45,442 or 1.4%. You see our full-time salaries at $13.8 million are up by $1,255,000, an increase of 10%. In there, we have the COLA for this year, which has been budgeted at 4.5%, although that's currently running at 8.48. CPI, which is the CPIW. The non-union employees, the city has just implemented a wage and classification study. Fiscal impacts of that we have buffered out of this by displacing unfilled employment positions, and I'll give you a slide on that. General services contract is at a 3% negotiated increase. Sanford Regional Communications at a 4.5% negotiated increase. Sanford Police Association contracts currently under negotiation, but we budgeted 4.5%. Anything beyond that, we'll need to buffer that out as far as implementation. Public Works and Highway, Local 481, has a 25-cent an hour increase and then a 3% negotiated COLA on top of that. So their market increase phased in over several years. Fire Department's under negotiation and open contract. Currently, we budgeted 4.5% impact, and the same as was said for the Police Department. Management and personnel policies, we budgeted 4.5%. We know the results of the classification study that we just did, and as earlier indicated, I'll show you that we're able to buffer that out. Part-time salaries is at $658,788. It's an increase of $56,792 or 9.4%. In there's a lot of movement. We removed, and there's further detail on this later, we removed the grant writer position. That's no longer being funded. Part-time grant writer. The personnel HR journalist shifted last year, but we picked that up this year. It went from part-time to full-time, reduced the part-time salary by $28,000, but you see that increase on the full-time salary. Fire Department, there's the elimination of $10,000 for the call company. We had one member left who's no longer serving with us, so there's no further use of the call company for labor. Recreation has an increase of $40,891. much of which is the part-time custodial position. More than half of that is the part-time custodial position for Memorial Gym that we're still, as of yet, to hire. And there was also an increase in the minimum wage that impacts our part-time staffing in the Parks and Recreation Department. We also have overtime salaries are at $1,146,000, an increase of $56,000 year over year, or 5.2%. The contractual and the increases are predominantly in the fire department at $17,000, police department at $13,000, and the Sanford Regional Communication Center at $23,412. Continuing on the summary of impacts, you have non-contract services. So these are services that we obtain from outside vendors for which there is not a specific short or long-term contract for. The predominance of this increase is substantially due to general assistance. We're increasing anticipated utilization by $300,000, of which the state will reimburse us 70% of that $300,000, but nonetheless, it's a $300,000 increase in GA utilization. The predominance of that is due to housing. So when we have an individual or individuals that qualify, we have to house them for the first 30 days as a minimum at market rates. So there isn't a per diem rate. There's a piece of legislation that's looking at that. There's a piece of legislation that's looking at once you've had your 30 days in one community, you can't transition over to another and pick up another 30 days. So there's bills in there to increase the municipal reimbursement. There's a lot of legislative action around general assistance this year, for which we may be able to pick up some wins on that potentially in our budget before you close this out. Supplies at $836,000 across all departments is an increase of $157,000, or 23.2%. This is almost entirely in salt. So when you look at our salt program, we went from $56.16 to $78.87 per ton, or 40% increase year over year just in salt alone. And we know this year we've been using an extensive amount. So. The equipment is at $130,000 across all departments. It's an increase of $16,219. It's a decrease of 11%. There's no magic bullet here. There's just been a reduction in the amount of small tools. The city's been aggressive in its program over the last number of years. We are well inventoried, so there's a decreased demand for replacement of tools. Building maintenance at $129,785 is an increase of $11,000, or 9.3%. The majority of which is a call out for a new level of maintenance at the Public Works Department. They're calling out for some door replacement, windows, some siding fixes, roof, and gutters. Due to the age of the facility, it's time to start making those new level of repairs. Vehicle maintenance is a bright spot. It's at $270,000 across all departments. We see a decrease of $2,300. Doesn't change the world, but the fact that it didn't increase and actually went down, I believe, is a good testament to the reflection of our fleet management program. For example, in Public Works, we're still short a mechanic, but the reports from our director and assistant director is that the fleet has never been in better shape than it is currently. Other than we have two of our brand new sidewalk maintenance units that are down for electronics, that the vendor cannot figure out what the electronic fix is, nor can we get replacement parts for the electronic board that's controlling the transmissions. You can put them into gear and they won't come out. So they're off track right now, so to speak. As well as the leased vehicles that we've implemented, rather than carrying over the aged vehicles, putting those back into the secondary fleet and incurring the high level of cost, we reduce the maintenance lines equivalent to leasing new vehicles and replacing those each 3 years. That program has served us well, as attested by our numbers. Utilities, this starts at a discouragement point, $298,000. It's a $79,000 increase, or 36%. That includes the categories of telephone, fuel oil for heating purposes, natural gas heating purposes, propane heating, cooking purposes, water and sewer. That is the combined utilities increase. Gasoline and diesel at $439,000. It's up by $143,000, or an increase of 48% year over year. You see in here a target of $3.89 on our gasoline and $5.96 on diesel. Those averages have been holding fairly well for us. You will see later in the budget presentation that the reserves that we set aside last year to potentially budget in the current fiscal year that we're in, we're going to be able to absorb that, but we're calling those reserves forward to help offset the impacts for this ensuing budget that you see before you. Electricity, $324,000, $120,000 increase, or 58.8%, due to the significant increase in our supply rate. The supply rate went up by 49% on our electrical generation. We do bid that out cooperatively. The last contract that we signed is from October to October, so it's a single-year contract, and we're hoping that the price of natural gas comes down, which is the primary driver in the market, that we'll be able to rebid that and see some savings over and above what we're booking currently. The next slide goes over positions. As earlier indicated, positions that were not recommended funding in this budget is the part-time grant writer, taking that offline. The fire department, the elimination of the paid call at $10,000. We eliminated 2 shared EO1 split positions, one between DPW and airport and one between DPW and parks. Those were unfilled over the last 2 cycles. We have been unable to fill those. Those were the 2 positions that were eliminated to reduce the impact, address the impact of the wage and classification study. So there's nobody occupying those that were defunded and taken out. And there was also a recreation water safety instructor that the Parks and Rec Department had not used for the last several years. That was taken out as well, and I've got a slide showing you the numbers on that. Looking at the fiscal year 24 request, you have a police officer that we anticipate coming out as a school resource officer that we will employ through the MDEA, so the cost of that is net zero to us. MDEA will fully reimburse for that officer going in under their guides, but working on our behalf. Currently in the budget, there are 2 firefighter paramedic positions pursuant to the agreed upon ramp up within the fire contract. We currently have been sharing for a long-term relationship. George Green, our lead assessor, is actually employed by the city of Old Orchard Beach, and we contract his services, and we pay just over 50% of that contractual cost. We are proposing to, since he is retiring in May, and that's no longer an available option for us, we're budgeting to put that position to a full-time assessor position employed by the city. We've advertised that. We're taking in resumes in anticipation, if this is approved, that we will interview and hire, and that's a net impact that I'll show you in a later slide. There is a civil engineer position in here. Even though the approximately $104,000 cost for that, it's a net zero to the city because it's coming out of the capital improvements line for the streets and roads. Historically, we have contracted without outside engineering firms for oversight of our QA/QC on construction projects. We have proposed, and with the city council's agreements, where we have put in for a full-time civil engineer in training to do that QA/QC. At an equivalent cost, likely less than what we would have been able to contract for that QA/QC for this coming year's construction. There is a second police major pursuant to the restructuring of the organizational chart in the police department. That position is in there, and again, I have a later slide. Part-time custodian from Memorial Gym, and there is a regular part-time, so a 20-hour per week position for the airport maintenance worker. We had to eliminate that shared position, plus there was still the continued need for the mowing contract that we have for the solar panels for that person all summer long, as well as the reduction of that part-time, that shared position, and also the elimination of a former seasonal position. We'll hire somebody part-time year-round and fulfill the needs of the airport. Libraries and outside agencies, we're proposing the same level of funding, $561,000 for our 2 libraries. Goodall would receive $397,175, and Springville Public Library would receive $164,800. Outside agencies, there is no year-over-year change in any of the funding levels proposed there. Riverside Cemetery at $33,000, Historical Society at $9,498, Veterans Committee at $3,000. You will note in your budget book, they requested 54 and change, 5,400 and change. The reduction in that is they had always requested funding for flags and other amenities for Memorial Day in the cemeteries and such. But they had always put in there at the request of the city for the parade administration and such under that for traffic control. We've removed that out of their request, and we have that budgeted under Parks and Rec as a standing order now. So it's the same for the veterans. They're getting the full services. Southern Maine Agency on Aging, $1,400. Trafton Senior Center, $10,000. York County Community Action at $3,677, and the York County Community Action Transportation, the transit buses at $35,000. And the chamber formally at $604 for dues was listed here, but it was moved to council dues. Debt service, minimal amount of change here, an increase of $45,406 or 2.6%. That is the new level of debt service for the second bond for phase 2 of the presidential lane extension at the airport. I did note that in here, over the next 2 fiscal years, we will have reduced our overall debt service for the city by approximately $1 million. So I've got that in mind as far as when we're looking forward for the sustainability, the feasibility of funding debt service on 2 new fire stations. That is a large area of significance that will help us significantly when we discuss that. Retiring out in the next cycle is the mill yard. That is the Heritage Drive. This is the last year of that bond payment. We have the revolving loan fund of $150,000 that went towards the Sanford Mill and the Aerofab parking lot construction, and the debt service on the Emery Mills dam repairs retires out as well. I did note that the 2 largest bonds, which are predominantly state reimbursed on the school side, retire out in 15 and 16 years respectively, and our police department, which is the largest on the city's current bond level, retires out in 7 years. Capital improvements program. Again, as I indicated earlier, there's 2 significant impacts in here. There's an $500,000 increase in the roads, and there's an $400,000 call out on Memorial Gym. The Land Bank Authority, under Community Development, is requesting $94,227 for the streetlights. That is a third of 5 payments. $250,000 for the fire station lease purchase. That is for the Notre Dame property. That's been booked in here. And $80,000 for engineering for the fire stations. Now that we know where the land is, we'll get the preliminary engineering completed on what the central station and the substation will look like on those 2 plots of land in preparation for a referendum vote. Codes is requesting the purchase of a vehicle at $43,500, but they have a net, they have revenues offsetting that of $12,500 from last year's request and $14,400 in anticipated trades. The police department at $294,084. There are the 3 frontline three frontline cruisers, the Ford Expeditions that need to go in here. Purchase of the 5-year body armor each year. The body cam lease. There's $5,400 in there for replacement of rifles. And then you will see in there we're proposing to do a 7-year lease purchase on complete purchase of new dual band radios for the police department. We do not have dual band radios now. They can only operate on a singular frequency. They were very inexpensive radios when they were bought. They're completely deficient. Such is the effect. There's many areas in South Sanford that they cannot communicate with their portable radios. Fire department, there are a number of lease purchases in there. Continued lease purchase on ambulance 3, our Quint engine 1, and then we are proposing to purchase 3 new cardiac compressors made by Stryker at a cost of $71,000. Our current cardiac compressors are completely out of service. The vendor has gone out of business. We can't get replacement parts. We can't get service on them. They've been taken offline, so it cost us increased labor to do compressions during those events, and we're trying to get back to having that equipment in-house. Under the airport, it's at $191,448. That is the slurry seal of the apron at the airport and other striping improvements there. It's a $191,000 project cost, and we have 95% of that is offset by both state and federal resources. So we'll have about $9,000 into that project. Parks and Recreation, there's Benton Park fencing that is in there for the request, $25,000 for the trails, and $76,000 for an F-550 utility truck to be added into the Parks and Rec inventory, as well as $400,000 for improvements at Memorial Gym, which would include complete roof replacement, floor gym covering system, as well as some tipping on the masonry work that insurance company has called out and mandated that we do in the ensuing year. Under the municipal facilities, you see a request of $50,000. There's continued renovations within the city office spaces, predominantly within City Hall. We're moving the IS department, the Information Systems Department, out of the basement up to 2R, where the Finance Department used to be. And then we are also renovating office space at the Memorial Gym and moving Parks and Recreation Department over there, which will then free up space for fire, codes, and planning in the Historic Hall to utilize that space better. Public Works, you see, has a call-out of $3,581,385. $2.5 million of that is the ramp up for the roadway CIP. We're at $2 million last year. We'll be at $2.5 million. We're at 2.5 last year. We'll be at $3 million this year. Plus, there's $500,000 in there for the fleet management program. There is also approximately $13,000 in there to achieve electronic plan review table for the engineering department, as well as $30,000 in there for air compressor line improvements, as well as an $8,000 request in there to create a GIS layer for all of our parking complexities in our community. We would make that create that layer and make that available for the public online. And then our last request in there for $143,000 is in the Information Systems Department. The annualized purchase of computers, the lease on the virtualized recovery system. There is also a request for, we need to purchase increased storage arrays. A lot of that is driven now by the body cams with the police department, even though they have a cloud-based system for the raw footage on that. For any piece of that that they preserve and utilize as far as a report, it takes up a tremendous amount of space, as well as all of our other systems are continuously calling out for more space, so there's more storage arrays to be purchased. And the last call out in there is a replacement of our current voice over IP phone system. The vendor no longer provides parts, service, or maintenance on our phone system, many of which are failing on a regular basis, and we're seeking to completely replace the city's phone systems. So in there's a municipal call out of $5,070,000. We have offsetting revenues to displace that of $577,564, comprised of $181,000 for the airport project, $47,675 into the parks towards their vehicle new purchase, $295,000 from special revenue account from Memorial Gym is available, and $53,000 in the Keep Maine Healthy. We can use that towards the $71,000 purchase of the cardiac compressor units. On to the revenues. Our revenue sharing for this year is part of our overall municipal revenues, as we're booking that at $5,003,000. 6.4% increase. Again, that was based upon the reestimate of that was announced in last December. I brought that into the calculation and projected that forward. We don't know yet what they're going to project for the next 2 fiscal years. They'll give that to us by mid-March, so hopefully we'll be able to bring you likely that number or more to help offset the budget this year. The the other municipal revenues are calling out at $13,315,000. That also includes $236,000 that we set aside on petroleum reserves last year. I'm requesting that you pull those back and utilize them this year. You also set aside $80,334 for training towards our paramedic staffing, and I'm asking to call that out and bring that back in for that offset. So we have an increase of $1,320,675, or 11%, on the non-property tax revenues. We're also proposing, as previously discussed with the council, that currently we're using $850,000. We've booked that for each of the last number of years for utilization of the undesignated fund balance. That balance has grown, revenues have grown. So we're comfortable in recommending that you use $1 million this year and a $150,000 increase. And then at the bottom of the slide is what the current reserves are. The city has undesignated $7.5 million. The school has $2.5 million, or just over $10 million combined. Looking at the individual breakdown, I'll go over this very quickly. The revenue sharing again's up by $301,000. The big disappointment on this sheet here is the automobile excise tax. We're booking that again at $3.9 million. We were tight to make it last year. We're going to be very tight to make it this year. We will make that number, but typically we could budget anywhere from 4 to 8% growth on automobile excise tax. But we all know with the difficulties over the last couple of years with computer chips, and the inability for manufacturers to meet the demand of the market has continued to languish. The fleet is aging, and our excise taxes are therefore dropping. This is the first time in my career that I've not been able to project an increase in automobile excise tax. Debt service reimbursement is an increase of $65,151. That comes from hangar fees. So as the hangars are expanding on Presidential Lane, they pay an impact fee of $47,581. They'll gain that back through a credit enhancement agreement over a number of years, but we get the money up front to fund the debt service that paid for the improvement. Most of those hangars that are being built there today are of a magnitude that's paid off in about 2.5 years. Then the city has 100% gain on those $1 million plus hangars that are being built there. And it also comes in the CGA, in the anticipated first-time land rental for the CGA, the solar project that's going under construction this spring. Use of reserves, $316,000. That is the fuel reserve and the training reserve that I spoke to you about earlier. Ambulance fees are up by $150,000, or being booked at $1.4 million. We're currently not proposing any change to the charge master, although we have a new fire chief coming in. That's the first thing I'm going to task him with, is a full review of the charge master yet again. But that being said, that $150,000 is just the increase in volume that we're seeing. Building permits, there are no reductions. We're booking that at $275,000 each year. We look at that thinking that, well, what big projects were built last year that we won't have this year, but we just do not see the decrease in building permits. In fact, I still feel that this is a conservative number. Cemetery fees are down by $5,000. Fewer people are buying lots. It's as simple as that. We did readjust the fees last year. It does merit looking at the fees again for this year for those lots that are being sold, but the story is fewer lots are being purchased. Pay as you throw, the orange trash bags, we're not proposing any fee schedule on those. I think it's positive that we can recommend that you pause on that yet again this year. And that's predominantly in that there's been a very positive response to the recycling markets. The recycling markets are coming back, so our net cost of disposing under our single sort waste system has reduced significantly, and when we get into the details, you'll see that. Recreation fees, an increase of $15,900. A large part of that is not a change to the program schedule fees, but the increased ability to have Memorial Gym and start to gain revenues from that. Airport revenue, you see, is down by $21,157. We had a contract with the town of Freiburg through their airport association to provide management services over the last year. That contract is now going away. Planning revenue decreased by $34,150. That's in our anticipation of a reduced number of full subdivisions coming forward for this ensuing year. The MDEA agent service fees, you can see, are increased by $307,000. We anticipate that they will fund 2 positions out of our police department this year to provide offsetting revenues to have those 2 officers work through the main drug enforcement agency, yet serving us here in the city of Sanford. Dispatch revenues at $1.9 million are up by $165,000. Those contracts have the CPIW, so that 8% CPIW went up 8%, and they're paying that. ARPA funds are booked at $435,770 utilization. There's a separate slide showing the call out on how that's being used. Then all other revenues combined, your smaller clerks' fees and such under that, are up by $361,000. This is the slide on the use of ARPA, where the $435,000 is to be used. There is the funding of the substance misuse treatment of the social worker in the mental health unit in the police department at $110,000, fully burdened. There are 2 dispatch positions that are fully funded at $179,000 and change. There are 3 training slots for the dispatch center at $45,180, and 1 training slot in there at $10,000 to again build that up to the full 22 employees that we need. I'm knocking on wood, as of today, we have 22 employees. They're not all fully trained, but that's that rotating door. It's the 2nd time in 12 years that I've been able to say that. Tuition and backfill coverage for clinical hours, $50,167. That's for, we have a number of advanced EMTs that are going for the paramedic licensing within the fire department. That is funding towards that tuition cost. In academy training, $40,800. That's 1 academy slot for an officer within the police department. We currently have 2 in academy training, 2 non-certs, have conditional offers out there. Which sounds really good until you take into account that we have 7 retiring between now and August. So that amounts to the $435,000. Looking at the remainder elements that are on your tax calculation sheet, the homestead exemption at $1,063,000, so there's currently a $25,000 exemption for a homestead qualified property. We're reimbursed at 72 point, some odd number, 72.5? Yes. It's going to go up 3%, but I think we're at 72.5, so we'll go to 75% this year, which is fantastic. So depending on where the mill rate comes in, this number should be adjusted upwards. But again, it's mill rate dependent, as well as state reimbursement dependent, and the number of units that we have. The business equipment tax exemption program is currently at $494,644. The state reimburses us 50% of the property tax that falls under that qualified category. We're booking that the same right now for tonight's calculation. Overlay at $362,000, which is what it was set at last year. Booking that the same. Then the tax increment financing, I believe, will go up this year, but we haven't booked that yet, but it's at $2,103,000. We can show you throughout your budget books where that $2 million is utilized as either offsets in the CIP, offsets in the CIP, offsets in the debt service, and/or comes in directly as revenues for offsetting other goods or services in the municipality. So in summary, the call out for municipal operations is $1,428,000. That's a call out for net taxation, or 7.8%. That's comprised of an expense increase of $2.3 million. Outside agencies, again, went down by $604,000 because that's in the dues. Debt service went up by $45,000. Capital reserves are up by $806,000. Again, $500,000 just in the roads and $400,000 in the gym. We are proposing that there's movement there. You could easily take that $400,000, bond that out short term, and reduce that number significantly in year 1. On the revenue side, revenues are up by $301,000 in revenue sharing. There is further opportunity there, I believe. $1.3 million in other revenues, $150,000 used in undesignated. So revenues are up by there. So the net call out for taxation is up by $1.4 million, or 7.8%. So holding all of those variables isolated, stagnating the schools, at this point in time, you would go from 14.8 to 15.39, or a 4% budgetary increase on the mill rate of 0.59 cents per thousand. Second to the last slide, sustainability. We'll continue to talk about that. We know for our expense budget, we try to look at sustainability over a number of years as being 4% annum. Obviously, this year is an abnormality to that. When we look at our 13 and 14-year analysis that we did recently for the earlier budget presentation, we saw that the city had an average year-over-year increase of 3.72% year-over-year. This year's expense budget obviously is at 7.58. On the revenue side, we projected 4% per annum there. This stems from the 13-year average. We had averaged 3.11%, with the 13 coming in at 3.62%. But this year, we're seeing revenues increasing of 7.8%. And then on the valuation side, we had a number of 4.73% as the target. For the past 5 cycles, we've been at 5.55% per annum. Last year, we were at 22.34%. So a lot of those long-term norms are really fluctuating dramatically now, making it much more difficult to do long-range projections. Topics for the March 21st agenda, which is when we'll get into the meat of the detail on the city budget side. These are the topics that I would anticipate. Municipal services, the vacant positions and/or new positions to be examined and positions to be amended. Memorial Gym, the impact of the debt service capital improvements could go over to debt service, as listed under the next item. Capital reserve, again, to the $400,000. The roadway ramp of $500,000, although we'll show you any reduction in that at all takes that long-range program and just knocks the meat out of it. There's also the fire station lease and pre-development activities to be further reviewed. And on the municipal revenue side, we do anticipate an increased projection of the revenue sharing and potentially other further use of reserves. I believe I'm 2 minutes over. Questions?
Bob, we'll take you, then Ann.
Just what you were just talking about, Steve, can you, the last item you talked about, the fire station lease and redevelop,
Yep. So there's $250,000.
pre-development, can you give me some more detail?
$250,000 in the capital program for the lease purchase agreement that will purchase the land in Springvale. And there's $80,000 of development cost in there for survey work as well as engineering and preparation for the referendum question.
Okay. And how far ahead of this in terms of time, because we have no community buy-in on this at all at this point? How, are we getting the cart ahead of the horse here a little bit? Not in purchasing the land,
Yeah,
those types of things, but in the pre-development, the idea, I'm looking at that as what's the fire station going to look like? What are the services? So that's what I'm saying. We have some land, I'm okay with that, but are we getting the cart ahead of the horse a little bit in terms of we haven't even discussed a referendum, bonding with the community, and here we are going to have a picture of what it's going to look like?
So at this stage, I lack the information that I could even take that to referendum because I can't, we have the stacking analysis that was done in the engineering, right? That stacking analysis takes all the necessary components that have been designed into the 2 stations, but they're in blocks. And those blocks get reconfigured based upon the piece of land that you're on and the development costs that are associated with that land. So we had 3 years ago with escalators what the potential construction cost of those 2 departments were at that point in time, but it was tentative based upon what does your land look like. Is it one? Can they both be constructed as 1 story versus 2? Can you get the drive-through? Things of that nature. So that's about another $80,000 worth of cost with engineering firms to answer all of those questions before you could take that information and then propagate that out and start the educational piece and talking with the public. Because as I stand here today, I can't tell you what those two stations would cost on the two parcels of land that we're finishing the purchase on.
And I get just a quick follow-up. I mean, are we at a point where the potential planning for the building, is it time to do that? Here's what I'm getting at, okay? Let's be plain. Is that something we need to put money in the budget for this year, or is this a kind of kick the can kind of thing, where, of course, we have to buy the land, we have to get, but... They already have a plan for the building? Yeah.
Yeah, we've sat on plans for 3 years now. That's millions of dollars of cost.
Yeah.
Because the expense of construction materials and labor and everything else has escalated. We could have never have predicted that we had, 11 to 15% escalators year over year built in, which we have, but it's just been,
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And that I've been waiting for that debt service to be freed up 2 years from now, which is when you would typically pick up your construction bond. So if it was voted this November, you'd be about 2 years out to pick up your construction bond, which would time up with $1 million in debt service reduction as a starting point.
Okay, so that's kind of answering my question. This is the time that we need to do this. It's not something that we can put part of that funding off for another year in terms of fire station.
I would not recommend putting
new
that
fire
off.
station.
I wouldn't recommend putting it off any further.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Council Hanselman?
Thank you. And most of my questions, Steve, are probably for a deep dive in 2 weeks as opposed to things we need to address this evening based on the time. But I know you don't like to read our minds, so I'm going to share. One question I'm wondering if you've already investigated, and I'd like to understand better, is in lieu of a part-time custodian for Memorial Gym, a third-party outside cleaning service. I suspect you've looked at it, but I just want to chat about that. I think it would be helpful when evaluating staff, both at the police department and fire department, to understand really clearly the command structure for both departments, as well as the staff per shift. They're different, I know, and I have a better understanding of the police department because we recently went over that. Also anticipated retirements, I understand at the police department, but I'm not clear on what they're looking like at the fire department. So it'd be helpful just to understand that better, I think, generally speaking. I'm a little blurry-eyed, so I might have missed the outside agency requests in the packet, but I didn't see those, Ronnie, so if they could be added, it would be helpful. And my thinking there, when we looked at the libraries, and I don't want anybody to get freaked out by my comment, but when we looked at the libraries in the 21-22 fiscal year, they had accumulated a fairly large amount of cash because of COVID funds they received. So I just want to do some due diligence and make sure that we're funding at an appropriate level based on their current needs and kind of look at their balance sheets. So I guess let's make sure their balance sheets are in those. On the police CIP with the dual band radios, I just want to confirm my understanding that that arose out of discussions on the debrief from 11:15 event. Is that correct? Okay. And then opioid funds that we're receiving currently and in the future, I know some of those are unknown figures, but would those be in other revenue changes?
There's 144,000 and change in there currently for the opioid funds. I may be able to book more for you this year, but those were the ones that we knew about at that point in time when the budget was put together.
And where do they fall in the revenue lines?
You'll see a revenue line that says opioid.
Oh, okay, I just missed it, thank you.
Opioid.
Again, I'm a little blurry-eyed. And then in terms of the comment about reviewing of the municipal piece in one of your slides, position amendments, I just want to say again that I want to look at positions that may not be providing a return on city investment. That feels important to me. And then with the CIP ramp up for the roads, which I'm very personally dedicated to, we had discussed at a previous budget discussion that we had some savings in this fiscal year related to
Riverside.
Thank you. Or maybe not now with the okay.
Maybe not now.
Okay, all right. So if there are savings, and I like the way you address that in terms of not necessarily reducing the CIP ramp up, but looking at savings from one year to another, but just want to revisit that. And then The other question I have, which I know feels scary, is looking at the use of undesignated funds. I realize we're ramping those up 150 to $1 million, which is higher than we typically do. But in light of what I'll consider anomaly increases to expenses, I would wonder if there's any capacity to look at a 1-year additional increase and how scary that feels and I just would like to look at it. So that's my hit list. Thank you.
Any other clarifying questions?
Just
Councilor
I was
Stackel?
trying to keep things moving along, but if you want to flesh this out, I have a number of
We don't have
different
the
comments.
time to flex,
Okay,
that's why it
so it
was
can be put
clarifying.
off till
Thank
later.
you, Bob.
Yep.
But any of the questions you can also forward to Steve so he can prepare for the next time and have answers ready for you. So that would help the whole process. Okay, thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
And now, 23-102-01, presentation of the 2023-24 school budget. Superintendent Matt Nelson. And I would like to point out that your cute little drawings here, which we did not have on the city side, I don't know why.
I will take no credit for that. I will give all due credit to Cheryl Forney, our business administrator, for doing that. I'm really impressed with Cheryl for her skills and her talent, but for someone who works with numbers, you can be bleary-eyed, and she tries to pep that up. So we'll try to do the same as I give you an overview of our budget presentation for that. When we approach a budget for us, we're trying to always do what we can do to come up with a budget that's going to best meet the needs of our students, while at the same time balancing what that impact is going to be in our community on support and taxes. For us, there's really some real bullet points that we focus on. Safety is always at the top of the list, ensuring that our facilities are safe and provide engaging learning and working environments. Also, providing student access to learning that combines academics with real-world applications, while really also supporting the social-emotional learning needs of our students. That is has become more and more important. Ensuring that our learning environments are welcoming and accessible to all students and to celebrate the diversity of our students. We're seeing our diversity of our student body increase. And also working to remain competitive with surrounding schools, surrounding areas, and the changing trends with what's going on in education and the industry, but also recruiting and maintaining our employees, our goals about that. For us, I'm very proud to be the superintendent of schools in Sanford. We have tremendous assets, and I think before we jump into the numbers, I want to talk about those real quick, and let's not lose sight of that. It starts with our students. I'll put our students up with anyone. It's not easy being a kid these days, and it's becoming harder and harder, but I am so proud of our students. Our staff, we have a talented and dedicated staff. It's certainly been challenging, and what they've been able to do and to come back and meet those needs of students has been tremendous. Leadership. I'm very proud of the leadership that we have in the district. It definitely has not been easy, but we continue to be able to come back and take those challenges that are in front of us and use those resources that we have. We're very blessed in Sanford to have the facilities that we do. We've made a conscious effort to go and show off those, whether that's hosting events on the stage, in the drama, in our Performing Arts Center, or in the athletic arenas, to be able to help people come back to Sanford, and also looking at our schools and being able to do that. We've had tremendous investments in those, and those are paying off, and they're definitely an asset for us. Positive and supportive school climates. We, as a school department, are taking on more and more of some of the social services that are going on, and that's something that has become a priority for us to do our work. Community support. We have tremendous community support in Sanford. We have that with our elected officials, but we have it also in our community. What I love about it is It's support, but it's not blind support. We have to be accountable for that, for us to be able to do the work that we do. And finally, our fiscal standing. I'm proud of the position that we're in. It certainly hasn't been easy, and doing that as we're going into this budget, it could be a heck of a lot worse for us to be able to come back and where we are in terms of our fiscal standing. Some of the challenges that I've mentioned, the mental health and social emotional learning needs of our students are high in the list. That's something that we encounter on a daily basis. Staffing, just like everyone else who's being impacted throughout, we are no different. That's been incredibly challenging for us. And the rising costs, everything costs more. So those are challenges as we were going into this budget to put that together. How do we get here? We start our budget process in the fall. We ask that our administrators and have their budgets into the business administrator, into Cheryl, at the beginning of December. She meets with each person to go over their budgets in December. Then in the new year, myself and Assistant Superintendent Steve Boussier and Cheryl, we meet with each administrator and we go through the budget line by line with that. And then we bring our school committee in. They come in on January 21st, where we have our first school committee budget meeting. And then we go through January and February to do that. And we approve a budget on February 27th. When we started back in January 21st, after what we were able to go through in that budget, we had an expense budget increase of $3,600,408. That's just about a 6.1% increase as our starting point. You may say, how does that come about? Well, you look at it for us with, as you turn the page, for us just for status quo, just for us to, but there's no new staff, no additional changes, keeping that status quo. We did budget a 9% increase in health insurance based on what our representatives recommended. That's with salaries up 2.3% and benefits up 16.2%. So for us, just turning that page, you're seeing that that's up 5.8% and expenses are up 4.9%. So we know that when I say that the cost of everything is going up. We then come in and at the end of January, we receive our preliminary state subsidy report. That's EPS, the Essential Programs and Services. It's the ED 279 document. That's what the state uses to fund schools. It's based on that model of essential programs and services. As people know, that funding, it's a methodology, and for us, I want to point out that what they use is a floor. It's not a ceiling for what they're looking at. It's at a floor that then allows you at individual communities to make that decision if that's something that you want to be able to fund and go beyond that in terms of that. We pay very much attention to that formula to make sure for us, we're a high receiver of state subsidy, we want to make sure that we are looking at that formula to make sure that we are in a position to maximize the funding since that's so important for us. So just to show that real quick, a summary of the essential programs and services. It's broken into sections. Cheryl's done a nice job of putting those in colors. You can see the change in subsidy. And so if you see something in parentheses, that's losing funds. And then as you can come back, there's also a total there of change per section as you're able to come back and look at that. I know that I was pleased, pleasantly surprised with our 279 and our subsidy for that. I was really worried because for us, we knew that there were some changes that had been made, one-year changes through the student-to-teacher ratios. We knew that was going to be a hit for us. So we lost almost $500,000 in our subsidy of that going back. What that Section 1 does in the 279 creates a cost per pupil that is used throughout the calculation. And so for us, we were able to get an increase in that funding. And that was, I knew that there were going to be changes in the benefit percentages. They usually don't do changes in the benefit percentages every year, but this year they did. And we were able, through that, to get over $1 million for that. And so you can look at some of those numbers, how they've increased. When I talk about a per student, or per pupil, what that costs going through the formula, you can see how that's increased as the state has worked to meet its obligation of 55% funding. This is something that we've got this on our website, and you can dig into this a little bit more. But I did want to point out that some of those areas where we lost. One of the big areas that we lost was in valuation. Okay, as we know, one of the things that's happened is the valuation in southern Maine, especially in York County and Cumberland County, as well as coastal areas, has really grown and doing that. So our valuation, that's done on a 3-year average, and so that caused us to have just under $800,000 less in revenue. That change that they made to the mill rate caused us to lose over $320,000 in revenue, and so that total decrease is $1,122,000 just in the valuation of subsidy that we received last year that we're not receiving this year, with the understanding of something that they feel like that should be something that the locals should be able to pick up. We all understand that doesn't work that way, because even though valuation is going up, usually that model should be on new purchases, and that doesn't take into account that the majority of people are not falling into that category in doing that. I want to point out some of those. I put up there Sanford's, our subsidy comparison. When you look at what we're in this current budget and when you're looking at for our proposed budget, when you're looking at our state subsidy, we did see an increase of $272,000 from fiscal year 2023 to 24. One of the things that we take advantage of in Sanford is we belong to a regional service center. When you belong to a regional service center, that gives you opportunities to consolidate and regionalize and save money. We've been doing that since we were able to, and the formula does reward you for that. So we were able to get $205,000 in subsidy by belonging to a regional service center. Also in Sanford, we have Sanford Regional Technical Center. We are the CTE center for a big part of York County. And so with that, we did receive additional funding of $220,000. I mentioned our valuation. There's a difference right there in our valuation of $112 million, $383,333. What luckily, as our valuation is going up, our student enrollment is also going up. If our student enrollment was going down, that would be a double whammy. We are growing in the sense that our enrollment is up 27 students. One area where we really got impacted was the economically disadvantaged students that are part of the formula. Fiscal year 2023, that was 56.74%. 2024, that's down to 49.28% with that. What did that result in? That resulted in us losing over $1 million in revenue. Okay, over $1 million. Now, we knew some of these things were coming. We knew that they had changed the economically disadvantaged rate, and we knew that was going to hit us, but we also had less economically disadvantaged students. When we checked our students to make sure against the free and reduced lunch forms, we were able to come back and also see that we did have less students. Okay, less students where that's coming back with a major impact for that. And then when you see the required local, and when you're looking at, in this current budget we're in, the required local was $11,338,700. That changes in 2024, where they now expect that required local to be $12,461,000. That's a difference of over $1 million in doing that.
Matt,
Yep.
I just want to comment. Some of us know, some of us don't. Required local means if we don't raise that much, we could potentially lose some subsidy. That's what it used to mean. No? That's a required local contribution?
Yes.
There's a minimum local contribution, correct?
Yes.
So even at the outset, we have to raise 1.1 million more in order to get the subsidy, to meet the numbers for the subsidy? Thank you.
Now, one of the things that I did is, one of the handouts that you have is, you have the York County valuation levels, okay? And that's not the long form, that's this shorter one on the 8.5 by 11. And there's what you can see, just the difference between here we are in 2023 compared back to 2021 when you're looking at the valuation change and that percentage change. Staggering. Okay, just staggering when you look at the percentage change. Sanford, we sit in there with a change of $528 million, which is a percent change of 33.13%. And then you can see how all of the other cities and towns in York County measure up in terms of where that is. When we looked at our budget, when we first started, there were new positions that we had in our budget, and here they are listed. Last year, one of the priorities in our budget was to expand our pre-K program. We were able to do that through a grant. It's working out wonderfully for us. But we knew as the grant got us started that there were going to be some costs that were going to be transferred over onto the local. And those are mainly coming from ed tech positions. You have to meet the ratio, you have to meet certain requirements to be able to do that. We also have on there CGL pre-K ed tech and a CGL pre-K teacher. We do have one remaining classroom in a collaboration with York County Community Action with Head Start. And our goal is to be able to bring that class over to Carl J. Lamb, and that will have all of our classes now within the school department. And we do have a contract with Head Start. So when I say that, that's not the entire cost of the ed tech or the teacher, okay? We do have some revenue that comes in from that we will offset that. So when you see that, it is still going to come in, it comes out to an expense, but it would not be the full of expense of being an ed tech and a teacher. I mentioned our diversity is changing. We do have an increased English of a second language program, so we have to respond to that. And so we have a teacher in that budget. We have an additional ed tech position that we started out in January 21st. Remember, these are what we started with on the 21st. Sanford Middle School, we needed a special education assistant director stipend. We needed to add a special education social worker at the high school. When you see what the caseloads were, it's staggering. SRTC, we have a special projects manager that is in a Perkins grant. We wanted to move that into the local. There were some athletic positions we're hoping to add to the middle school to bring on 7th and 8th grade boys and girls lacrosse, 7th, 8th grade volleyball. That was a situation where you could probably have 90 kids coming in at the middle school level getting involved in athletics. And then we also had a third SRO. We had 3 SROs in this year's budget, but one of those SROs was our law enforcement teacher for the law enforcement program for SRTC. That teacher that police officer retired from the police department, and so he's continuing on. We're pleased that he's continuing on as a law enforcement instructor, but now that changes it where it becomes over into the local for us to be able to have to come back and do that. So when we started on the 21st, that's what you had in those new positions. What we were trying to do is match up with our additional subsidy that we received to make sure that we were spending it on what the needs are. So when you look at that, I mentioned ELL changes. So we have 39 students this year. That's going to 57. And so that's where you see us having to have another teacher. That's where we're hoping to use some of that subsidy. We also received additional subsidy in special education, and that's where we were trying to be able to put that subsidy to get those positions for resource room and self-contained, as well as the social worker at the high school as you look at that. Okay, so our initial budget, once you put the revenue into it, on January 30th came out to a 6.1% increase in expense, but for taxation you saw that increase at 25.5%. We looked at that and knew that that's not sustainable, so we continued to get to work, on what we needed to do. So we went and we cut some expenses along the way. So we made that expense go down from 6.1% down to 4%. We cut everything from adjustments that we made to our budget in terms of sick day buyouts. We adjusted and tried to be creative with some of our positions, adjusting a custodial position to save costs. We removed some things in terms of additional hours for the athletic trainer, technology, a variety of different things that went on to do that. We were able to cut $302,000 down, and then we also moved some of those positions that we had in the local budget that we were moving out of ESSER into the local. We moved those back into ESSER to do that. That SRTC special projects position, we moved that back into Perkins, and we did have some savings in health insurance. So for us, that total change in expense, $1,142,000, but that got us down to 4%. When you look at that to taxation, what that did, we started out, we had to make an adjustment in the adult ed subsidy. We received our subsidy, we anticipated wrong a little bit, so that jumped us up to 26.6. But by reducing those expenses, making those cuts, changing those positions, we also looked to use of reserves and doing that, and using use of carryover, that was able to get us down to 11% increase in taxation. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move on. I talked about health insurance. We started with a 9% increase. That's what our people were telling us to budget for an increase. That came in, when it did come in, it came in at a 4.3% increase, so we were able to use some saving. That resulted in some savings. And then what we've also done, as we've been trending, the last couple of years have trended well in health insurance for us, and we've been using money in reserves. And what we were able to do is to tap into those reserves, and so that was able to come down for us to really get that down to what would be a 0% increase for that. And I talk about reserves and carryover. We have been able to, when we were going through COVID, there were opportunities for us to have some savings. We were able to actually put money into reserves that we had created years ago, that we were never able to do that. We were able to have accounts in capital reserves, health reserves, fuel reserves, and special education reserves. So this budget, we've reached into those at a total of $557,000 from those use of reserves. And then we've also used carryover, just under $550,000. That allows us to keep our carryover at the 3% of this year's budget expenditures, just under 3% of where that is. And so those were things that we were able to put into this budget for that. Just so people know, we'll go into this in more detail next week. The capital reserves, we do have $80,000 left in that. Our health reserves, we still have $340,000 in that. The fuel reserves, we have $41,000 left in that. We did use all of our special education reserves in this budget. We did use some one-time expenses in the capital reserves, really around safety. The radio repeater that we had to put in down at the high school and the technical center for $12,000. We've also been able to have to put on some shades on our doors. That's a cost of just under $18,000 in looking at that. So this year we used carryover more as revenue. We hadn't done that in the past, and any carryover that we used were really on those one-time expenses to maximize that. You talk about our fund balance and why we were trying not to use carryover as revenue. As you can look at the history there of our audited fund balance, it wasn't good back in fiscal year 2015. We were short $881,000 with that. We started in fiscal year 17 to use some of that carryover that we'd accumulated as part of revenue in the budget. And as you can see, that was challenging for us because we were not able to meet those in 2018 and fiscal year 18, fiscal year 19. Fiscal year 20, with the COVID year, we were able to come back with that money. We've held on to that. We've tried to protect that. We knew that the changes were coming in the student-to-teacher ratios. We knew the economically disadvantaged was changing, and we knew that valuation was changing. And that was going to be impactful for our subsidy in looking at that. So there's a chance to look at where we are on the audited fund balance. Now, what new positions are left in this budget? We still have those pre-K ed tech positions as well as the CGL pre-K teacher. Remember, those are not the full cost of a teacher at CGL. There is an offset that we do receive in our arrangement with Head Start. We did keep the athletic positions in the budget. When we look at the middle school age of being able to have positive impacts for the money that comes into it, we felt that that was something that we wanted to say was a good investment. And right now, we do have the elementary SRO is still part of that local budget. I'll go into more detail next week, but with ESSER, as we come back with, those are our federal funds that we received for us to be able to deal with COVID. We spent those funds to focus on getting our kids back into school, in-person learning. A lot of that was being able to make sure that our student-teacher ratios were much smaller. We really focused on any educational recovery that was necessary, any learning loss, and we also made a big focus on the social-emotional learning of that. We had 3 years to spend those funds. We are currently in the second year right now. Next year's 2023-2024 will be the final year as those funds are to be expended by September of 2024. Fiscal year 22, we started with 52 positions covered by ESSER and the CARES funds. In this current budget, we have 50, and in this proposed budget, we are now looking at 33 positions to be paid. When we started with that, we were looking at moving 4 positions from ESSER to local. Now, I know that that wasn't what it was intended for, but we looked at the subsidy that we were receiving in the changes that we had and felt that that was defensible for us to be able to do that. We also had, and the same thing goes for those special education teachers and the ELL. And then, as I mentioned, we now have 19 of those positions in ESSER that are not going to be continuing for us going forward. All right, here's the comparison. When you look at our current budget to the proposed budget that's in front of you, you will look at the expense increase, as I mentioned, in this budget is 4%. Last year, it was 6.4%. Our taxation increase is at 11%. Last year, it was 10.6%. You look at some of the major changes that are in this budget. I've talked about the pre-K. We knew that was coming, that there would be some expenses that, as well as we did, the grant would not be able to cover all of that. There's $192,910. Now, there is a meeting later this month. We're hoping that there's going to be some funds that will continue to come back to be able to help us be able to do that. But right now, we're not at the top of the list. We need to wait that out, fingers crossed. We are looking at an increase in our outside placements for special education. That went up over $640,000. The SRO position that I talked about, just making that change, having it go from the SRO to the law enforcement instructor, that's a $96,000 change. Our fuel and gas is up $194,000, and we do have custodial positions that we had covered by CARES funds that are no longer, that are now part of this budget, when you can also see that comparison. One thing that you have in this sheet is the longer version. I won't go into that tonight, but what I would ask you to do is to be able to look at that when you get a chance. What you'll notice, okay, is when you're looking at that sheet, you'll notice that here in Sanford, we're a high receiver of state subsidy. 75.28% of our budget is funded by the state. And when you look at where that lines up in York and Cumberland County, I think Gorham is next at 59.08%. And so when you look at that budget, I look at that and you'll see of what we're doing compared to the other school departments with that. We are, for the per pupil costs, we're below the state average by $3,210, and below York County and Cumberland County average by $3,800 with that. And so we're below in all categories. And so I sit back and I'm not, obviously that's nothing to be proud of, but at the same time it goes back to showing the work that we're doing, that the budget that you have in front of you does not have excess. It's coming back for us to be able to work on doing that. For the summary, we try to put this into a format similar to the one that the Steve and the city uses. You can see where we are in our current budget compared to the proposed budget when you're looking at that variance as it's coming back. As I mentioned, our taxation variance is 11%, $1,709,000 with that, with it. I want to point out that back in 2022, in fiscal year 2022, we did receive additional subsidy at that time. When Governor Mills did put that money towards funding education to 55%, we were able to take that $961,000 that we received late in that process with the Budget Committee with that, and that was something that was being able to be put in, which was great, very helpful, but it also creates some cliffs for us to be able to look at that. And next week, when we get into this deeper, we can talk about adult education with their decrease being mainly due to some staffing methodology with that. Okay, so that's where we sit. I started talking about our assets and started talking about our students, and I want to end with that when you look at this budget in front of you, it's hot. We understand that its impact. We don't want to be something that's naive to that. But when you look at our increased social emotional needs, there's a lack of community mental health resources. All of this stuff is coming back, and it's coming back onto the schools for us to be able to take that on. I'm proud to be part of public schools. I'm proud to be in what I feel is the most important profession that there is. We take every student, and regardless of the background, and we work hard to make them feel welcomed in our schools. It's more about just reading and writing and math and doing that. We make sure that they're fed. We make sure that they can play. We make sure that they can interact and get along with people and others and follow the codes of conduct that we have. We're working to provide mental health support, nursing support, learning how to live healthy lives, support learning how to be productive citizens. And we talk about and we work on teaching our students to think critically, to problem solve, to work with others. We provide opportunities for clubs and activities, music, theater, sports, the arts. We expose students to potential careers and help them develop their future aspirations, and we connect those aspirations to their learning. We provide co-op programs, career and technical education, SRTC, internships, apprentice programs, financial literacy programs. We've got increasing special education needs. There's a lack of early intervention that's happening right now that's impacting us as a school. We're able to offset that because of expanding our pre-K program. I've talked about the ELL increased students that are coming back, and also those academic deficits that have come back for us to be able to do that. I'm also really worried about what's coming down the pike. We talked about the impact of valuation on this budget, what we are anticipating next year if there's not any changes, that we're also looking at it, that it's going to go up by $176 million, and that's going to be an estimated loss of another $1.6 million. I talked about those ESSER positions that have been critical for us to be able to come back and be able to help us move through that. That's going away. So that's 33 positions that will be going away. And then we also have to be very careful of our collective bargaining agreements, because as you can imagine, everything is going up to be able to come back and do that. So those are some challenges that we have in the future for us to be able to do that. 2 minutes, just like you.
Okay.
That was a little fast, and I apologize, but there's a lot of information there, and obviously with us next week, we will be able to go into greater detail and more in depth. And also, if there's any questions or areas that people want us to make sure that we focus in, please let us know. with that.
Well, thank you, Matt. I do like your cartoons, but you, as a true educator, you gave us homework.
Yes.
A couple of comments. One, I noticed the economic disadvantage numbers were down. And do you think that has any impact of the fact that we now give totally free breakfast and free lunch, that it's very difficult to get parents to fill out those forms?
Yes, with an asterisk. What we had done is, in the past, we were able to use an economically disadvantaged form that people could check out, and there really wasn't a lot of checks on that. This year, we were able to do the free and reduced lunch checkoffs. That free and reduced lunch is still tied to federal funding. So we made a campaign in the fall. Those of you who have students know, you probably were like, why is the superintendent continuing to bug this? It's borderline harassment. But that's because it's so impactful for us.
Right.
So, but I also know that we had less because even though we had more, we were able to get responses back that were probably greater than last year's, but when we double-checked them against the free and reduced that they didn't qualify, we couldn't count them as economically disadvantaged. So in addition to that shift that we had for percentages, we also had less kids, which is the double whammy to
All
impact
right.
the funding.
A couple of comments about things you did put in the budget. Social emotional learning is extremely important, probably more important than math, English, science, and social studies for those teachers out there. I know they just cringed. But because of what we just came through, it's probably the only way these kids are going to learn. So I really appreciate you including that in. Pre-K program, I just see that as a future of Sanford. Yep. That within a few years, we will definitely see the impact on our educational scores and the development of the students within our community. So I see that as a positive. The next generation will benefit tremendously from those programs.
And as we look at future budgets, we're planning for those, for those positives to adjust for us to reallocate some of our resources because of the impact that they're having.
Also, knowing how IEPs work, and if people wonder what that is, that's an individual education plan. The social worker at the high school, I know you're probably way outdoing the number of hours that she's even allowed to book. She or he, I don't know which it is. But you definitely, I can see that as a definite need. Also, because of my past experience in education with the SRO program, we were able to get a lot more parents into the building because of the resource officers being there, and they're willing to come in and talk about stuff that happened in the community. So that is a real PR piece. And also students relating to the resource officers, I think that's also a future of Sanford policing, that we're trying to promote positive policing, and I think that's all a part of it. So I think that's a really good vision on the school's part to continue that. So I'm going to ask, are there any more clarifying questions? Councilor Stackpole?
Yeah, hi, Matt. Speaking about the SRO officer, in one of your final slides there, you talked about 96,000 for the SRO officer. Is that for the elementary officer to being put into the budget?
Yes, that would be the change for us to have to be able to maintain 3 SROs
Right.
and still have the law enforcement instructor at SRTC, yes.
Okay,
That would be
so is it a combination of funding for a teaching position at the high school?
Strictly
And then
SRO, that would be
strictly
shared,
SRO.
and the plan is to have that SRO be shared amongst our 3 elementary schools. Right now, we have 2, one dedicated to the high school, one dedicated to the middle school. Both of them also are able to take on anything that comes up at the elementary level, which does from time to time to be able to do that. This 3rd SRO position would allow one to be dedicated and shared amongst the 3 elementary schools.
Can I, for next week's conversation, just request a little information about the need? I mean, you're shifting it from the high school to the elementary schools, number one, and you know, what went into those?
We're keeping them still at the high school and middle school. This is just an additional SRO. It's an additional SRO. So we're keeping the high school, we're keeping the middle school. We had a 3rd one that really just only had teaching responsibilities. So now that's where That person moves over into, we have to fund that in our budget.
Okay, and
now
that's,
the third.
okay, so that's in your instruction.
Yep.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other clarifying questions? All right, moving on. The next part is setting the agenda. Steve, do we do that here, or is that something we do in our agenda meetings?
I think, yeah, I think the agenda is the municipal next week, more detail. Or school.
School department is next week.
School department's next
Week
week?
after that is municipal.
Okay. So is that all we have to do for that, or do we need, okay, so it's not grueling, it's just, all right, thank you very much. Any council comments? All right, this meeting is adjourned. Ooh, did you
Can I
have
say
one?
one more thing? I know many of our school committee members are either out of state or at their kids' events night. We have a big musical thing going on at the high school, so don't mistake them not being here, that they're not invested in this budget for that. So just wanted to
Yeah.
point that out.
She's the assigned school committee member for this evening.
All right,